The untold truth of America's most infamous prison breaks. Rain hammered against the metal roof of the old Federal Archive building as the investigators stepped inside. The storm outside felt almost intentional, as if the sky knew she was about to open files that had collected dust for decades. Records of escapes. Reports written in haste. Notes scribbled by officers long retired. Stories whispered in break rooms but never fully pieced together. Tonight she was here for one box, a box stamped with 3 words. Infamous prison breaks. She placed it on the table, flicked on the desk lamp, and pulled out the first file. The cover alone felt heavy. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, 1962. The handwriting on the front, slanted, faded, belonged to someone who had witnessed confusion unfold in real time. She opened it, and suddenly the room felt colder. Inside were the first reports written the night 3 inmates, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, vanished from the island prison. Pages described the sound of the storm, the confusion during early head counts, and the moment guards discovered the decoys tucked into beds. Empty cells. Rain hitting concrete. A raft made of raincoats drifting somewhere in the dark. The investigator flipped to a page marked with a torn corner. It wasn't an official report. It was a personal note from an officer who had worked that night. If they made it across, someone helped them. It wasn't a claim of conspiracy. It wasn't an accusation. It was a question from a man who couldn't understand how 3 people vanished so cleanly. And as she scanned the file, she realized something extraordinary. Half of the theories built over the decades came from a few uncertain sentences written in the middle of a stormy night. She set the Alcatraz folder down and pulled out the second file. Marion, Illinois, 1984. A maximum security facility. A place officials once called escape-proof. Until 2 inmates proved otherwise. The file described a morning that had begun with routine checks, quiet hallways, and officers making rounds without suspicion. At first glance, everything seemed orderly. Nothing out of place. But buried deep in the report was the detail that changed everything. A maintenance schedule posted incorrectly, giving 2 inmates knowledge of guard rotations. Not the rotations themselves, the gaps between them. The investigator underlined the line twice. That detail had forced federal officials to overhaul scheduling procedures across the entire system. But what struck her wasn't the method, it was the subtlety. The escape hadn't involved chaos. It involved noticing something nobody else had. A mistake so small it almost didn't exist. She flipped the page and found another handwritten note, unsigned. Security doesn't break all at once. It cracks first. It echoed the same truth from the Alcatraz file. Small cracks. Small gaps. Small mistakes. That's where the escapes lived. She exhaled and placed the Marion file aside. 2 escapes. 2 different prisons. 2 different decades. Yet the patterns, the overlooked moments, felt eerily similar. At the bottom of the box sat the thickest folder of all. Texas, 2001, the Texas 7. The first lines described their escape so calmly it almost made no sense, as if the writers themselves were stunned by how it happened. Disguised as maintenance workers. Coordinated movements. Exploiting communication lapses. Moving quietly where no one expected them to. The investigators slowly read through archived interviews, timelines, internal memos, and analysis reports. Everyone agreed on the same thing. The escape exposed not a single weakness, but several small ones working together. A phone message that wasn't logged. A tool inventory that wasn't double-checked. A door that needed repair weeks earlier. A guard rotation that didn't account for human error. None of it pointed to a mastermind plan. All of it pointed to opportunity created by routine. She leaned back, running her fingers over the edges of the files. 3 infamous escapes. 3 moments that changed security across America. 3 incidents separated by states, decades, and prison designs. But each one was defined not by violence, but by what wasn't seen. And then she noticed something she'd missed before. At the bottom of the box lay a slim, unmarked folder, thinner than the others, almost hidden between the pages. She opened it. Inside were 3 index cards. No dates. No signatures. Only short, cryptic notes typed on an old typewriter. Card 1. The storm hid more than the water. Card 2. The rotation wasn't broken, it was predicted. Card 3. Maintenance uniforms were borrowed, not stolen. Her pulse tightened. These weren't official statements. They weren't standard summaries. They were observations, precise, almost analytical, written by someone who had studied all three cases long after they happened. She searched the folder for a name. Nothing. Just a final note tucked behind the cards. 3 escapes. 3 gaps. 3 truths that were never added to the reports. She turned the note over. On the back were 5 words that sent a chill through her. Check the files they removed. Removed? By what? She stared at the box, suddenly realizing it wasn't just a collection of history. Someone had rearranged it. Someone had added to it. Someone wanted her to see something the official paperwork never spelled out. She pulled the box closer. Because if files had been removed, then the untold truth, the real truth, hadn't escaped from prisons. It had escaped from the paperwork. The unmarked folder sat in the center of the table like a challenge, thin, worn at the edges, and packed with clues that had never been officially acknowledged. The investigator stared at the 3 typed cards again, each one quietly accusing the past of leaving something out. The storm hid more than the water. The rotation wasn't broken, it was predicted. Maintenance uniforms were borrowed, not stolen. 3 escapes. 3 patterns. 3 unsettling hints. She turned back to the Alcatraz file first. Everyone knew the broad story: raincoats stitched into a raft, papier-mâché heads in the beds, and a stormy night that masked their absence until morning. But that first card bothered her. The storm hid more than the water. What did that mean? She checked the weather logs. Heavy rain, low visibility, strong winds. But then she found something tucked in the side pocket of the folder, a small, yellowing piece of paper with a list of names. Officers, most likely. Not unusual. But next to one name was a faint pencil mark. She pulled up the old duty rosters. That same officer had been stationed on the west side of the island, the side facing the direction the raft was believed to have gone. She looked again at the pencil mark, circled twice. Someone at some point wanted that name remembered. She searched for follow-up interviews. There were none. Not one. The officer hadn't been questioned beyond the basic report, despite being closest to the escape route. Not suspicious on its own, but strange in context. Especially when compared to what was missing. She flipped to the next file, Marion, 1984. In the early pages, she noticed something she'd overlooked before, a reference to an internal analysis memo that wasn't attached to the file. She scanned the box. Nothing. She searched through the supporting documents. Still nothing. But inside the unmarked folder, behind the cards, she found a single typed page. Rotation prediction. It wasn't on letterhead. There was no signature. Just a blunt analysis, typed by someone who wasn't guessing, someone who knew. The memo stated that the escapees had anticipated the rotation gap because the same guard had repeated an earlier routine for several weeks in a row. Not official protocol. Not assigned. Just habit. The escapees hadn't hacked a schedule. They had memorized a person. The investigator underlined this. Routine is the real weakness. But what alarmed her was the final line. No further review recommended. But why shut it down? She placed the memo beside the Alcatraz notes. Patterns were emerging, just like the mysterious writer claimed. Then she opened the Texas folder. The official record said the Texas 7 stole maintenance uniforms during their escape preparation. But that third card, maintenance uniforms were borrowed, not stolen, implied something else entirely. She dug deeper. In the interview transcripts, one maintenance worker mentioned noticing equipment slightly out of place 2 days earlier. Nothing missing, just rearranged. Another said a logbook page had been torn out. He couldn't remember what was on it, only that he'd written something down the week before. Fragmented clues. Small inconsistencies. Nothing concrete. But then she found it. A form buried at the very bottom of the Texas file. A copy of an internal incident report filed weeks before the escape. It wasn't about the inmates. It was about a missing pair of uniforms. The supervisor wrote that they were likely misplaced and recommended no formal investigation. The date on the report made her exhale sharply. The uniforms hadn't gone missing during the escape. They had gone missing before the escape even began. The Texas 7 disguised themselves so effectively because someone had given them time before anyone realized something was wrong. She set the form beside the others. 3 cases now pointed toward cracks that hadn't appeared overnight. Slow cracks, predictable habits, ignored warnings. Someone had known this long before she opened the box. She picked up the unmarked folder again. Whoever compiled it wasn't rewriting history. They were filling in the gaps. She checked the back of the folder for markings. Nothing. But as she tilted it under the lamp, she spotted faint indentation marks, as if someone had once written on a sheet of paper that rested on top of this folder. She ran a pencil lightly across it, revealing the pressure lines. 5 words appeared slowly. The 4th file is missing. She froze. 4th file? There were only 3 famous escapes described in her assignment. Alcatraz, Marion, Texas. But this message insisted on another escape, one significant enough to belong in the same collection, and one that had been removed entirely. She checked the box again. No empty slot. No label mark. No signs anything had been taken. Whoever removed the 4th file did so carefully, precisely, leaving no trace. She leaned back in her chair, pulse steady but deep. Someone wanted her to know that the biggest truth, the untold truth, wasn't in the 3 cases she'd reviewed, but in the one someone didn't want included. She returned to the cards. The storm hid more than the water. The rotation wasn't broken, it was predicted. Maintenance uniforms were borrowed, not stolen. And she realized something else. These weren't just notes about what happened. They were instructions. Breadcrumbs left by someone who had studied multiple escapes and found a pattern deeper than any report dared to say. She placed all 3 cases side by side, 3 escapes that had forced nationwide reforms. And now, a 4th erased from history. Someone didn't erase it to hide a criminal. Someone erased it to hide a mistake. She stood, grabbed her coat, and locked the archive room. Tomorrow she would find out what the 4th escape was, and why someone had gone to such lengths to bury it. But as she stepped outside, into the fading storm, she found an envelope taped to her car window. Inside, typed in the same familiar font, "You're closer than you think." And below it, a single date, a prison name, Dusty Ridge Correctional Facility. She whispered the words, realizing she had just crossed a line she didn't know existed. Dusty Ridge Correctional Facility wasn't a place most people remembered. It didn't appear in documentaries. It wasn't the subject of national interviews. There were no best-selling books about it. It was the type of prison that existed on paper, handled routine transfers, and kept a predictable rotation of guards who had worked there for years. Maybe that was the point. The investigator drove down the long road leading to the front gate, the sun sinking behind a line of pine trees. Dusty Ridge looked ordinary: brick walls, guard towers, fences stretching in carefully measured lines. Nothing about it hinted at a hidden chapter of American prison history. At least not yet. Inside the small administrative building, she introduced herself and requested access to old internal logs. The receptionist, an older woman with glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, glanced up with mild confusion. "Most of our older records were digitized years ago," she said. "But some of them, some didn't convert properly." The investigator's pulse tightened. "Do you have the originals?" The woman nodded slowly. "Basement archives. But you'll have to bring your own light down there. The bulbs flicker." The basement was lined with shelves stacked with boxes, some labeled, some not. Dust drifted in the air as she descended, flashlight in hand. She scanned for anything marked with the facility's name. Nothing. She moved deeper down the row. Still nothing. Then, in the far corner, half collapsed beneath a pipe, she found a box stamped with a faded logo. "This if incident reports." Her lungs tightened. She dragged it into the open, coughing as dust rose in a soft cloud. The lid was warped but still intact. She opened it. The first thing she noticed was a gap, a missing section of files. The empty space was too clean, too deliberate. Whoever removed the contents had done it with precision. But they had left one folder behind, wedged in the corner as if it had been accidentally overlooked. It was thin, unlabeled, stamped with a date, June 1993. She opened it carefully. Inside were only 3 pages. Page 1. A routine transfer list, names, inmate numbers, and transport destinations. But halfway down the page, a line had been crossed out with a marker. A name blacked out completely. She held it under the flashlight. The ink was thick, intentional. A hand had written beside it, "Do not process." She turned to page 2. An internal memo from a lieutenant. Per directive, no formal report filed. Lockdown procedures followed. Movement undisclosed. No signature. No detail. Nothing describing the nature of the incident. Then she turned to page 3. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten, block letters, unmistakably similar to the anonymous notes in the previous files. They never escaped. They were let out. Her breath caught. Not because of the statement itself, but because of what it implied. Alcatraz. Marion. Texas 7. All escapes created through cracks in the system. But Dusty Ridge? Someone wasn't trying to escape. Someone had been helped out. She checked the transfer list again. If someone had been quietly removed from official records, then the blacked-out line hid the identity of the inmate who was formally erased. She flipped the page over. Someone, maybe the same person who left the earlier cards, had written on the back in pencil. Follow the number, not the name. She lifted the list to the light. Behind the ink blackout, faint indentations revealed a partially pressed number sequence, incomplete but legible enough. #41706? The last digit was unreadable. She felt a shiver crawl down her spine. In old systems, inmate numbers were more permanent than names. Mistakes could be corrected. Transfers updated. But numbers rarely changed. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.